Hello, everyone. Isn't RDA this year going so well? So many really great presentations. Welcome to the Complex Citation Working Group session. So we are well on our way towards getting towards our recommendations and, getting all of the very broad stakeholders engaged. Let me just check on oh, thank you. Okay, someone's got the chat going. Great, so let me move forward and get us off and running. And there we go. So our agenda, this is it. Welcoming and introductions, quick overview. We're going to talk about the challenging concept around enabling attribution. We've moved beyond our cocktail napkin examples into actual prototypes, and Joan and Martina are going to be showing theirs. We have a really neat effort happening out of British Oceanographic Data Center, and Justin's going to share that. And kudos to James as well, working with Justin. And James is on maternity leave, right? Paternity leave, I think, isn't he? Yes, very exciting. I hope we have a picture sometime. Then we will have an opportunity for you all to have discussion, but please don't hesitate putting questions in the chat if you have one. And then the final stretch. So I'll bring us all back, and then Leslie will offer up the last few minutes of our agenda and close this out. So let's move on. Joan, I added you to our proverbial pictures. So we have our inaugural 4 working group leads. So myself and Deb Agarwal and Martina Stockhouse and Leslie Wyborn. But truly the working group leads are larger. We have Justin and James, of course. And when Deb went into retirement, she said, "Oh, people, don't worry. I'll stay with you and make sure this makes it to the end." She really did retire. But we are incredibly grateful for her energy and perseverance and clarifications. And Joan has stepped into those shoes and taken us further and brought in new use cases. So Joan, we are adopting you as one of the co-chairs. I didn't even tell you I was going to do that. So there you go. I hope you like the picture. You're welcome to send me a new one. I found that on your website. Scootling along. Okay. Oh, eat. Okay. There we are. All right. So I'd like to introduce all of you to a vocabulary word that you probably never imagined hearing at RDA, nor anything within your career. So a reliquary. A reliquary is a neat little thing. It's a humorous word that we are using to describe a container for precious things. And if you're at all religious, this is probably just like not feeling good right now. Or if you're not religious, it's not feeling good. But it is truly meant to be a temporary word. And it's meant to keep us away from a lengthy conversation about vocabulary words around things like collections and packages and crates. I think somebody used envelope once. Matt Cannon, that may have been you, and just so that we don't assign a word, and the right word will come along once we're getting towards our recommendations. We're not worried about it now. We know what we're up to. So I just want you all to know the vocabulary word. And what's humorous to me is that it's now popping up without the working group in ways of how to implement reliquaries, and that just tickles my funny bone. And also, I'm delighted that other people find their work really useful. So let's introduce the working group. The challenge is, how do we put precious things into a box through the publication system and acknowledge it on the other side? So what are those precious things? We're talking about data and software and other digital objects. We started with data. Meriflex has so many different DOIs that represent the different flux towers, and they want recognition when data from those flux towers is being used within research, and literally had no way of doing it short of a data paper. And the data paper ages. The moment it's published, actually, frankly, the moment it's submitted, it's aging. So that doesn't make sense. That's not accurate. And it's also, we have use cases where the data, software, images, video are coming out of different repositories. And it could be thousands and thousands of citations in order to properly represent this paper. We also need to be able to put PID on this thing. That reliquary needs a PID, and it needs to have its own attribution. And although we've just recently had an interesting conversation with the indexers on this, uniquely identified and trustworthy. It's a persistent identifier for this collection, this reliquary, that points to the members of the reliquary such that attribution for the members is possible. We'll have this conversation later in our discussion. The usage license has to allow for this construct, and we need to avoid what publishers are doing. And I'll use AGU as an example. We also do not like to cite more than 40 or 50 data sets or digital objects in the references section. We push it into the supplementary information where, frankly, it goes there to die, because you can't find it outside of finding the paper. And that's not how we want data and software to be identified. So we needed a better way. Scootling along. So we have initial use cases that came, and those were from, Justin's going to talk more about the British Oceanographic Data Center use case and actually the prototype. Martina has been representing the figures within the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. For my home AGU, this is a really big deal to be able to have the attribution for the creators of those figures. So this is when I lead commonly within AGU with, hey, the IPCC needs this, people. And similarly with the environmental and earth science work, the flex towers are also really important within my space. Don't worry, we have oceans as well. So sorry, Justin, don't mean to leave you out. And being able to have accurate representation. We now have more use cases. So these were just our first set of 3. And they represent different ways of thinking about the reliquary. So they were a good start. And now we have more. So the goals, the reliquary goals, we want to be able to cite this in a paper. So think about it as like a little package that's, I know I keep using different words. That's the fun of it. The reliquary represents all of the digital objects that support the research, not the journals, not any preprints or anything like that. It's the data, the software, the audio, the video, and physical samples. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to forget that, physical samples, etc. Such that this is what all went into the research. And there are a number of disciplines that need this level of this capability. So we want the members of that reliquary to have direct citations. We've been talking to the indexers about how to do that, how to actually unzip the reliquary. That's another fun way of thinking about it. Unzip it once it gets through the journals. And you say, oh, wouldn't it be easier to get the journals to have as many possible citations as is necessary? I can assure you that this is a no-go, that we are more likely to have the reliquary make it through publication than to convince tens of thousands of journals to allow a very large number of digital object citations and to get them through properly. There are just so many steps along the way of journal publication, the number of people involved, the number of people that you need to convince to do this. You're more likely to get one cited reliquary through than you are to get 1,000 data set citations through. So that is why we continue. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the journals make changes along the way, but it's not going to happen broadly. We might, I think Nature's data journal, Scientific Data, does allow quite a lot of citations. As a matter of fact, it shocked me when I saw one recently, but I think they are a unique outlier. Reusability and traceability. So we actually have use cases where we would like to have that reliquary reused, which is very interesting. We also, another way of interpreting that word reusability is demonstrating that those data sets have been used and reused, tracing the entire provenance. So on the reliquary and on the members of the reliquary. Easy to build. We need a researcher to be able to do this. without any help. And spanning multiple repositories, and I've talked about the rest of this, different types of digital research objects. By the way, that QR code in the bottom right is for you to join the working group. If you haven't already done so, this will land you on the RDA page where you can join the working group. Please do, and then we can keep you up to date on everything. Okay, so far we have been heavily engaged with a number of different repositories on what it means to actually participate in this. We've talked about what that tool looks like, and today we've got prototypes that help us think through those first couple steps on what does it mean to actually stand up one of these. We've talked to a few publishers. I see Matt's here from Taylor and Francis, and the folks from Wiley have been here as well. PLOS has participated, trying to think who the others are, but they know this is something that we're working on. And one of the challenges for publishers that we haven't yet touched on is in-text citations and what that would mean. What it would mean to have a persistent identifier representing a collection, a reliquary, come into references. So this is a conversation yet to happen. We have talked to the DOI registries. We have talked to Crossref, which is the primary DOI registry for papers. We have talked to DataCite. They do support collection DOIs like a reliquary. So that is hopeful. And we have had several conversations with indexers and representing the enabling the attribution that's necessary for the members of each of the reliquaries. So, but I want us to get to I want me to stop talking and hand it over to, oh no, it's still me again. Okay, so enabling, so there's a little bit that came out of the indexer conversations. What does it mean to actually, I'm going to use a word that we don't like using, credit. How do we make sure that when a data set is used for research, that we establish credit to the creators of that data set? And because we're talking about packaging things together, credit to the creator of that reliquary. Does it mean the same thing? No, it really doesn't. It doesn't mean the same thing. And we're actually struggling with the construct of credit. So we use the term enabling attribution because that's really all we can do. We can't tell somebody else how to value a reliquary. We can't tell somebody else how they should put it into promotion and tenure, but we can enable them to be able to do so. We certainly can promote it, but we can't make them change. So we're having conversations on with indexers, with others, on what it means to enable attribution. And I think I have time. We're 15 minutes in. Let me stop sharing for a moment. And because now I can see everyone. Ooh, there's 34 of us. That's fantastic. Does anybody want to weigh in on this conversation around enabling attribution? So, for instance, did anybody put their hand up? No. Okay. Oh, I'm in. Credit. Let's see. Oh, thank you for Amy. Thanks for the collaborative notes. I'm for enabling attribution. That's really great. Justin, go ahead.
I have no idea how to do it, but I do know of a funding call in the UK that might give us a chance to look at the problem. I'll be sharing some notes next week on trying to build a proposal on what credit looks like and how it could work. But I don't have time to do it this week. But it's a really neat little funding call. It ties very neatly to the kind of AGU science and society themes and informatics themes. And they're looking for intervention-like pieces, and research credit is potentially one of those that might fit their brief.
Perfect.
And there's money within there for both UK level and international participation. It's not much money, but there's money for both within the bits themselves.
Yeah, that's really good. Lindsay, you had your hand up. Did you want to go next?
Yeah, I can mention something. I think something I encounter quite a bit is when there's data citations versus article citations and how you assign credit, what those roles are, and then getting permission from people if they want to be a part of it is an interesting conversation in and of itself. And then on the other side, you have, depending on what service you use, are there even schema fields that apply? And how many of those can you actually apply? So those are just some basic level technical challenges I think I face all the time with that.
Yeah, I think we would agree with you. We are the number of stakeholders to actually make this happen. I think we underestimated how many there were, but we're not, we're not backing down. We are just fortifying, and the use cases that have been identified, the number of them and the variety of them across different disciplines is just giving us a reason to try to figure this out. So we are at a higher level conversation. So Lindsay, if you're not a part of the group, please make sure you are. But having you participate in the more detailed discussions around, what these all mean and who has to benefit and how we make it through. And the workflow there's multiple workflows, right? Like, first of all, the one I spend a lot of time in is the publisher production workflow. So first of all, you have to receive a citation for a reliquary and go, oh, that's an entire package. How do we even explain to editors and peer reviewers and staff at the journal what that is and what to do with it? So there's guidance that's needed there. There's education, and there's 100,000 journals. Oh my goodness. So that's a challenge. And what I'm hoping is that it just looks like a data citation enough to make it through most publisher workflows without too much consternation. That's what I'm hoping, because it will be a data site DOI. We know it'll be a data site DOI. It gets to Crossref, and we don't think Crossref is going to do much with it. But the indexers are like on the feed into Crossref. So they actually have their own piece of the puzzle. Anyway, this is the conversations around unzipping and connecting, and what does the connection mean? I probably just went in a rabbit hole, but yes, please join. Carlo, you have your hand up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Now, I was thinking about what you said before about the giving credits to all the member of what is in a reliquary. I guess you have a problem of granularity because unless I'm wrong, a reliquary may contain another reliquary, and you could have a chained object. So if you split it and you give attribution to each member, I can receive a free credit just because I'm free level down inside this hierarchy of inclusions.
So I just went out of my head, the transitive properties. Thinking by math, right? The indexers asked us not to do that. They asked us not to require levels. So citing a reliquary inside a reliquary, they asked us not to do that because of the point you've just made, that how deep can it go? How wide can it go? And we actually have been talking about asking them to navigate that, because we can imagine, like, you're building on your research, you already have a reliquary for what you just published, you're going to use that data again, and you're going to add more data sets. So you can imagine, I want this plus that. I think for an initial product, we can't do that. We have to make it doable and not create a barrier for the indexers to help us. They are critical for enabling attribution. So probably out of the gate, we'll say, no, a member of the reliquary cannot be another reliquary. You just remake the reliquary. And maybe it's the tool provider that says, okay, you just want to add to this, no problem. We'll give you all the members and then add in 3 more, create a new DOI for that reliquary and go on your merry way.
Because
So,
this implies you have some metadata on what is inside the reliquary, because it could be anything, a paper, data, just a DOI with a landing page. And how do you prevent that this something is not a reliquary? It's really tricky, I guess.
well, yeah, a type. The schema includes a type. So we would identify it as a, the DataCite currently has a type collection. We could use that. We could reuse that. So, yeah. So Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, just to say, I think your ambition that this looks and behaves as much like a data citation as possible in order to not break publisher workflows sounds like a very good idea. Obviously, we know that there's still plenty of work to do to make regular data citations work in the way that they need to, but that is in hand in lots of places and is getting better. But yeah, I think the thing is, if you have 10 data sets in a reliquary, at the moment, the person who creates the folder, the envelope, is the person that gets the credit, not the people who actually did the work of the files that is in the thing. And how you feed that down to the file level that's the kicker, right? That's what we're talking about here. So yeah, I guess it's exciting to hear that the indexers may have a solution. And yeah, I kind of liked what Carlo was saying. Actually, if the metadata of the reliquary actually contains all the DOIs or some metadata about what's inside it, I could see that being a workable solution. Like having that information in the metadata, I could see that being a way that could be filtered down, rather than someone have to go in and find the things inside it and then do something extra. If there's actually in the metadata of the reliquary, that could be possible. But yeah, this is interesting, exciting, and I'm really pleased to see all the progress that you've made since I last heard this. So well done.
So Matt and everyone, we are going to have this topic theme in 2024 that will likely go beyond our lifetime for the working group. I think we're going to have to re-charter for the next steps. Just heads up, it's a multi-step process clearly, but we are stirring the pot on the concept of credit, and when you do that, everybody gets involved. So please come help us navigate, because it actually pushes the button on what it means to give credit to a data citation all by itself. You know, what does it mean to enable attribution on a data citation, right? Period. Then, like, let's get that right, because I don't even think we have that right. Now let's add in a reliquary. Go, okay, now let's make it big. Do it at scale. Yeah. Graham, you're having a really good time with the word reliquary. Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, kind of like some of this is we're revisiting an old problem. You know, if you take the old situation of you have a review paper, yeah, and it's kind of that has then oodles of kind of things it's then actually connected to. You know, the review paper is the thing that ends up getting cited a lot more than the actual kind of what's further down the tree. So you have the issue about kind of the traceability and the credit assignments, as it were. And I think it's a very similar situation here. I think what we have to be careful of here is making sure that the objects we are creating, these reliquaries, need to be recognized as transitory nodes down to kind of what they contain. You know, that it's they are signaled to be, you know, you need to open the box to see what's inside and to deal with what's inside. Because if we don't do that, how are we able to, you know, signify that these are a different object, not just something else to be cited? They have to be kind of transitioned through.
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying. And so let me lean in on what you're saying, realizing that not probably everybody on this call can stand firmly where you are. So it needs to be really clear. Okay, I'm gonna restate what you just said. So when you create a reliquary, the act of creating a reliquary needs to have 0 value. Like, just because you collected a bunch of data sets together doesn't mean that was valuable. It's just an admin mechanism. That's what it should mean. And we went for a number of months with that's all there is to it. That it's just an admin thing that happened, and it is not a scientific contribution to everyone. It's just a collection. Then we hit a number of other folks that are like, no, it is valuable. And that's what blew my head apart. So yes. Oh, thanks, Lindsay. So it may be that we have to put our foot down and say, okay, in order for this to work, we have to define the reliquary as not in and of itself valuable, but its members are the value. So, yeah. Oh, Joan, you just shook your head back and forth.
We have both.
Matt had his hand up first, I think.
Oh,
but...
okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, and just to say, yeah, I was just thinking about what Graham was saying about review articles, because I think the reason that they get cited is that someone's doing the work, so you don't have to, right? Like someone else is reading hundreds of papers and summarizing those arguments for you. And so that's why those things are valuable, is because they're actually doing a load of legwork. And so maybe, I wonder if that analogy doesn't, well, depending on what you're saying, I guess there's a decision to make, isn't there, about whether we're saying there's no value or there is value, about whether that review analogy holds.
Yeah,
I can see both sides. And maybe, like, I can see that there would be people that be like, yeah, this is a really valuable thing to do, to pull all this stuff together and put it in one place and say that this piece of work is on this. On the flip side, if you, I can see both sides. I think, you need to make a decision.
yeah, and it so Amy, you're up next, but Graham is recognizing the so again, while we're using the word reliquary, Graham's recognizing that curated collections are valuable because they've been curated. And if we use the collection DOI, we've just said something about the value of this reliquary, and maybe we've just gotten into trouble. Like, that's not what we meant. All right, that's really interesting. Okay, Amy, go.
Building on what Graham has said, creating a collection, a curated collection, is a valuable activity because, we can go to lots of fields and talk about how valuable collections are and what meaning they bring to the members of that collection and why. So at this point, when we're kind of juggling, how do we give credit to these different activities that are happening in that space of a reliquary? We might be getting into that space of the actual credit and roles, kind of credit taxonomy idea about, I know, that's what I share that thought that inspired that expression. It gets more complicated. And we need to think about the roles and how attribution is parceled out within the space of this reliquary type structure. Yeah, exactly. The credit taxonomy.
Oh, so we do have quite a lot of other things on our agenda. So we will close out here. And so these last two folks, and then we'll move on to our next topic. Go ahead, Joan.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point about, I guess a lot of our use cases in our repository that we imagine would be like around integrated data products, which are highly valuable and take a lot of work and expertise to create. Like, they can take months or even years to do this kind of like data harmonization and synthesis work. And so that's one use case. And the other one is the physical sample use case that I'll talk about in a minute. It's kind of relevant here too, that so maybe we'll learn more about that as I do the presentation.
Sonia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, I agree the curation of data is, curated collection is important, but that's a little different from curating the data set to deposit in a repository. So how do we differentiate? I don't see any credit role we can use for this kind of thing. So almost we have to create a new role, if you're gonna use this a credit, taxonomy, or give this a credit. That's all right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The credit taxonomy today doesn't really identify, it's limited. It's very good, but it's limited. I just learned yesterday, our editor-in-chief retreat is yesterday and today, and I learned that actually quite a lot of AGU journals are either requiring or highly recommending the credit taxonomy. So very good, but limited. Yeah, we have to figure that out. Okay, so I think this conversation actually helped to solidify for me how to talk about it, the curated collections versus what we don't want value for a reliquary, but it depends on our discipline. It depends on our discipline and how we see it. Okay, let's scootle along. I'm gonna share my screen again. Just a second, I had to do the right mode so this actually works properly, and here we go. Oh shoot, I'm back up at the top. One moment. There we go. Okay. Joan, let me get this into slideshow, and I didn't ask you, do you want to share the slides? Is that preferable to you?
This is fine.
Is it fine? Okay, all right. Yeah. And shall I go to the next slide?
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, so my name is Joan Damrow, and I'm a scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and I'm one of the co-chairs also for the Earth Science Information Partners Physical Sample Curation Cluster. And so we recently partnered with the Complex Citation Working Group to hold a hackathon, which ended up being more like an extended discussion around what our needs might be for complex citations or reliquaries for physical sample tracking and credit. And next slide. So we did that last month. And we're a little bit earlier stages here and thinking about how to do this for physical samples, which can be anything from a soil sample or water sample collected in the field to like a specimen of a taxidermied animal or other biological samples as well. And so what we've been doing more recently is working on guidelines, because we're a little bit, I guess, further behind and even providing guidance and having consistent practices across the research community and how people publish sample related data. And so we've been working on guidelines for this. And we recently published a flyer that we distributed in AGU in a more extended scientific author guide for publishing open research using physical samples. And that just includes like basic steps on describing the actual physical samples, each sample that is involved in a study with rich metadata, ideally using like standardized metadata templates, and assigning or using persistent identifiers such as the International General Sample Number or Generic Sample Number for samples, which are now effectively DOIs, and then publishing and citing data sets that include these sample identifiers, and even referencing samples in papers using consistent formatting. And so we also, along with this, we published a paper outlining these guidelines and pointing out some of the remaining community and technical needs to make sample tracking possible. And one of our major conclusions was this need for complex citations. Next slide. And so in this paper, we outlined some basic use cases that were brought up in our community for needing to track use of samples. The first one was just infrastructure to publish and cite large number of samples and associated metadata. So similar to what we're talking about here, many studies involve hundreds or thousands of physical samples and also subsamples. Several data repositories do include sample persistent identifiers as related identifiers and dataset metadata. such as EarthChem and Pangea, but these are actually pretty limited. Most repositories don't do this currently. And so that was one of our recommendations to move towards doing this. But there are still challenges in infrastructure and linking, automated linking across these systems. Next slide. Another major issue is enabling credit for all of those involved in physical sample collection and curation to demonstrate the value of investing in this. And so samples are often really expensive to collect and also to maintain and curate over time in long-term collections. And both the physical collection repositories and the individual sample collectors need this ability to track the use of samples to show their collection's impact over time. And this is important for funding and promotions and making decisions about collection management and which of these long-term collections are being supported. And so like some of our examples are, a collection manager may need to show how museum collections have been used over the last 10 or so years to justify funding. A funder may need to see the downstream impact of samples, that kind of thing. And so some of the challenges that are in enabling credit for different roles along the path and where and how to that information is added. There's still really inconsistent use of sample identifiers here and still rare use of persistent identifiers, which is why we kind of focus on the guidelines as a first step in our work. Next slide. Another similar issue is needing to track the use of sample data generated from laboratories. So a laboratory that publishes data or provides biological samples also needs to demonstrate impact and how their analyses are being used. And this can help also with improving their services, identifying what kind of analyses are used over time and just generally showing their value. And so that there's also a need here to track provenance. One of the challenges, this is the specifically an example brought forth by the Joint Genome Institute, which analyzes genomic data. And so these samples end up with biosample identifiers, which aren't DOIs, and they can be efficiently identified using automated methods, but aren't currently recognized in metrics. Next slide. And then another is just being able to connect interdisciplinary sample metadata and data and other research outputs. So in the data repository that I work for, we have a lot of highly interdisciplinary work. So it's really difficult to track samples and resulting data that were sent to numerous collaborators and labs for a variety of different types of biological and environmental analyses. And these are then compiled and analyzed and published in different files and data systems. And so we have this growing need to be able to track how these are connected. This is valuable for future synthesis work and also just for project data management. But we don't currently have good infrastructure for tracking provenance and mechanisms, and we're still trying to move the community towards using things like persistent identifiers. Next slide. So we did work through several use cases of, trying to connect and track provenance for specific source samples. And this is kind of showing a simplified example of all the various entities that this physical sample, like a sediment sample that you collect in the field, may be connected to, based on sampling site and project and all of the various subsamples and analyses and resulting data products and that go along with that and end up in a kind of related to their journal publication. Next slide. So we've discussed needing mechanisms for credit and automated cross-linking. You can click through a few here. So you have a source sample that may be a series of hundreds of source samples. You can click. that may be compiled into a data set. That data set includes the source samples, source sample identifiers, along with all of their metadata and the data associated with those in a specific set of analyses. And then the data set should then be cited in the journal publication. But what we want is to have that provenance information and credit also sent back to the original source sample record. So we want the data set to get credit because that's additional data added that goes along with these samples, but we also need the provenance information and the links to all the related data sets, because often these source samples, it won't just be one data set they're related to, but multiple, and we want to track all of the places where those samples are used for to add scientific value to this interdisciplinary work. Next slide. And so the other issue is often this will be involve multiple levels. So you'll have a source sample and click through. Sorry, maybe I should have done these slides. It may be split into multiple subsamples for different analyses and then published on separate landing pages for like the metatranscriptome data and the metagenome data. And these are then connected to these biosample landing pages, and often the biosample is what journals are requesting to be cited. But we also want to send information on how that sample was used back to the source sample as well. Next slide. And so we've done these connections to connect these related data products for 7 different data sets that are listed here. And so one of the questions that we had in our group is for, for some use cases like samples that are, they're kind of a smaller granularity than data sets. This may be, so often a data set is considered a collection when you're thinking about physical samples. So, and the metadata that's associated with the data set, as well as the all the samples included within it. So next slide. So there are just a lot of different entities that potentially could be involved in having a more coordinated sample research infrastructure and more effective use of persistent identifiers and being able to track how all of this is used. And so one of the things that we did was kind of outline in this flow diagram all of the different entities that may be involved in some of the current roadblocks that we want to try to start addressing. Next slide. And so some of our conclusions were, again, we want to also provide credit to the sample collectors, track provenance of how samples are used, enable things like automated cross-linking, and just having a record of all the places that a sample has been used, which can be triggered by the citation, sending that information back to the source sample record. So for physical samples, our discussions have kind of focused around like how can we, what could be some possibilities for doing this, and one of them is we could make sample data sets more like a collection and to enable these complex citations, but we could track use of the sample in that in the original sample record if that information is sent there, if that makes sense. So the question is like, how do we get this information sent back to the source sample record, and what is that information? Will publishers and indexers be doing this like we've been discussing here? Would we need a harvester to gather that information? And then what information are they sending there, like metrics on the number of citations, and then links to all of the data sets and papers where that has been used. And we need participation across these different stakeholders, the data repositories, publishers, and indexers. And there are, again, a number of questions around granularity and what about when we're citing subsamples. And so, yeah, we're more earlier on in this discussion, but may have some slightly different issues around granularity. And that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time, or
Martina or Leslie, I'm not able to track our time. Do we have time for John to take our questions?
I think we are a little behind at the moment.
Okay.
So maybe take questions after the 2 use cases for both.
Sounds good.
Or use the chat, please, if there's something that can be answered in the chat. And I will share again. All right, Martina.
Yes, so this is the second use case we want to provide here with a prototype, so it gets a bit more practical and technical. So the first part will really be some information on what the use case is about, and the second part will I will demonstrate the state of our prototype. Next slide, please. So the whole work, I have to add, is carried out mainly by CEDA, by Charlotte Pascoe and Graham, who is here in the audience. And we have a lot of contributors and support from NODC, from Justin and James, and, well, the RDA group, just to mention the whole lot of people who support us here. The IPCC assessment is assessing peer-reviewed literature. So we know that a lot of data is analyzed, for instance, to create the figures and other outputs. There's a real intense data usage, so many different sources of data, many different data sets. So it's a high volume, which is really used by the authors to derive their results. Next slide. So I will really rush through that. The second information I want to share is that linked to this use case is the implementation of our FAIR guidelines in the IPCC report for the first time. And the main motivation was to enhance the transparency of the outcomes. So it was not driven by citing input data, but it was really driven by making the whole results more transparent. And the 2 key points which are important for this work is that centered around figure and table creation, we want to make the creation traceable or even reproducibility. So that was one focus. You need the input data information, you need the script, and we call the results final or figure data sets. And the second aspect is to get the credit to the input data providers. And for some of the input data, and especially which I will present here, CMIP6, we assign DOIs, so the citable entity is a large data set collection, but commonly you only use very few data sets out of that collection. An outlook for what we are aiming for. So the idea is to have this short reliquary DOI and put it into the figure caption. So have it together with the figure itself and have a link that enables you to get all the information how this figure was created, and also enables to attribute the input data providers, or to avoid the credit vocabulary. And just one information, we want to gather information using provenance records, but I think that's a bit too far. Next slide. This is a slide provided by Lou, and I'm really grateful that she analyzed with me what our state is. So we have this flat reliquary with just one level of relations. You see, I hope it's large enough. We have on the upper left the DOI of these large collections from CMIP. We have in the middle on top, thanks Shelley, the data sets out of these large collections with their handles. On the right, we have the code applied. And usually there are further input data sets which might have DOIs or handles, which are used to create the figure. And the second piece is that we want to describe the internal relationships among these different related identifiers. And this is what is called here connection PID on the lower right. And this is more the aim, what we want to do for the next time. So we have these different granularities, the DOI level, the handles, we have the code, and everything is used to create the figure. And maybe next time we will have a provenance record. So that's more or less an analysis of what we want to do. Next slide. So our prototype is really based on what we have in AR6. Shelley is smiling, so the credit goes to the two partners, so Graham and her daughter, really providing us with a real reliquary for our prototype. So we are driven by what we have. And in AR6, we have the problem that the information is not available to a full extent. So we only have for the CMIP6 input data, the information in which figures the data was used. So we do it backwards somehow. We know from the input data side where our data was used. So that restricts us a bit towards the usage of the CMIP6 data in these specific figures. And we decided for Zenodo because it's available and it provides us with this flat reliquary approach. And we want to add the connection PID with the files which can be uploaded in a human readable version and in a machine accessible version. And we have a lot of ongoing work. So this is just the first approach, which I will show in a minute. So we want to transform or use JSON LD instead of JSON for the machine accessible files. We want to integrate the software and code a bit more into the prototype. And of course, there's the huge part of how to include that into the AR7 workflow. And of course, there are many other open questions that we have discussed here on the working group level. So the second part would be the demonstration. So let's see if...
Shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, let me try.
I'll put a link to the slides. They should be in the notes, but maybe they're not.
I think you can see the screen now.
Yep, looks good.
So this is really a Zenodo sandbox example. So it's not published and I cannot provide any links because you have to log in. It's only visible for me. It's the state of February, so it does not include the latest discussions we have had. This is an example for lots of input data used, so figure 915. Maybe we have discussed roles. So we felt that the author is not me or Charlotte, my colleague, or Graham, but that we all contribute to that reliquary to put it together. So we decided to give the credit for the creator to the Data Distribution Center. So we are partners there. Secondly, my role in creating it, we felt the best fit of an available role within DataCite would be the editor role, because I just put the pieces together, but I'm not responsible for the data within the reliquary, but just to form the reliquary. So that's what we decided for after a discussion. Metadata can be extended, so it's really showing what we want to add. I want to first show you the relations. So these are the data site relations. This is the flat reliquary part here down in the related works. The first sections are really the different input data sets. So one section is here from CMAP and goes down over the handles to here. That's just one DOI for the input data. And I really have to open a couple of them to show you that it's really a large amount of data, and its data is stored in a federation which has several index nodes. So the data is at different nodes worldwide, and there are some index nodes where you can search through the data. Just to give you one example, this is the index node at Lawrence Livermore. So in the US, I don't want to see the replicas. And what I want to show is that we have 800 data sets, but not all are used for the figure. We have seen from the number of handles about 15 to 20. The second thing, well, that's not so important. So each data set consists of several netcdf files, but we can identify this level by a PID. So we have a handle on this data set on the granularity. Yeah, and just to finalize it, we have a link to the citation information, so you could go back and know how to cite it. But essentially, we have in total 700 or nearly 800 data sets, and what we use here is more or less 15 to 20. The second complexity that we have, so the CMIP6 data in the US System Grid Federation has no long-term preservation. So we move some of the data in the DDC for long-term archival, and that's exactly the subset used across the whole report. So, and just to show you the number, it's just a quick link. So what we have in total in the repository, if it now allows me to go there. So the figure has 15 to 20 data sets, but within the whole report, we have about 160 data sets out of the 800. So that's the kind of complexity that we have with the input data. I want to quickly give you the other side. So we link it to the report page. Well, just quickly go to the IPCC. So this is hosted by IPCC in Switzerland. So this is the figure 915 with all the additional information, the caption where we want to include in the next cycle a link to the reliquary. Currently, there are links given to the final data set and to the code, but I want to show you that from the direct reliquary content. So the final data, which is created with the script applied, is hosted in the UK at CEDA. What I have in the scripts and in the database added is the information on the code. So it was the GitHub Zenodo link used. So we have a reference. In this case, we have the same granularity problem. So you can cite the code, which was used for all figures of chapter 9 together. And this link takes a long while. That's why I have it open. And out of these many different scripts, we have here figure 915 with a code. It's part of the official GitHub repo for IPCC Working Group 1. So that's quite typical for an international collaboration, that everyone contributes some bits and pieces to the infrastructure. And the challenge is really to link all of that together. And the reliquary will help us with that. What I've not shown is the file. So the internal relationship that I have demonstrated is something we want to describe in addition, and that's in the uploaded file. We have reached the limit for the preview at Zenodo. So very quickly, I have a bit of a problem that I can't get to the tabs. So it's really a quick one to show you the JSON as it is. We are working on that to make it a JSON LD, but basically for the example, the description is really straightforward. We have the CMIP6 device, a subset in the DDC AR6. So it's a has-part relation, and we have for CMIP6 all the data sets, the A2, whatever. So this is more or less what we came up with, the resources we have. There are a lot of open discussions and improvements, and that's why we show it here to, well, get your ideas of what we can make to make it better and how to improve it.
And for those of you who are like, well, gosh, it looks like you solved the problem. Oh no. This is just using current technology to get as close as we can to what it would look like when we solve the problem. So Graham has been really prolific in explaining where this doesn't go. But it helps you visualize.
Yeah, exactly. The files are somehow not captured. So we just have uploaded files with information which we want to share with the PID graphs, which Justin will present, but it's currently not in the system.
All right, if we are running behind, good conversations will make up time on the other side. So Justin, do you want to share the slides, Justin, or do you want me to?
I'm happy for you to, if that's good. I can get the view of everybody in as well.
No worries. Happy to do it. And then please don't hurry. I think we'll just carve time out of the last items. I think this go to
start. So I'm going to be showing a piece of work which I helped to fund, but has been taken on by a much broader team. So around autumn last year, our funding council came to us and said, you need to bid for this. There's a pool of money, but we need a bid by Friday. And we had about a week to put some ideas together and get a piece funded. Next slide, please. And the bid went in to fund that work, and then I went and got another job, as happens sometimes. But that doesn't mean I have no interest in this credit for research and tracking the citations, because I'm now in an engineering team, and my new boss is very interested in how credit can go to, we can understand what the contribution of the engineers is to research and what impact our engineers are having. So by extension, I'm working in a slightly different theme. And the work was funded. And when we wrote the bid, I took a piece of the complex citations work from this RDA group. I also took a piece of Lou's work on sensor PIDs, which is another RDA group, and suggested that as a piece going forward. And then I'm conscious Lou's on this call and Graham's on this call too. And then Graham was on the team that turned this all into a bid. It got funded, and Lou has been leading this piece, but with a much bigger team to actually look at the graph and how that could work. And EDS is Environmental Data Service, which effectively is a top-level grouping of all of the environmental data centers in our funding council, which BODC is one of them. Next slide, please. So the Environmental Data Service, so it's a grouping of different data centers. We've got British Antarctic Survey, who have the Polar Data Center. We have Centre for Environmental Data Analytics, which is the analysis, which is terrestrial. And then we've got geological with BGS. And then the ocean is National Geographic Centre, where I'm from. And then we've got CEDA, which is a large compute, and they also host a lot of model data. And this group brings together those groups across the UK. So actually feeding into this work, we've gone way beyond thinking about the original BODC use case to actually thinking about things across the spectrum in the different environmental domains, which I think is the most important thing from this slide. And that can include things like biological samples, instruments, code, databases, and collections. Next slide, please. So this is the project, or part of the project. There's two pieces. So one is around persistent identification of instruments. And this RDA group has been around much longer than the complex citations one. And they have their initial recommendations, and the project's looking to build a pilot of effectively UKRI sensors for that. And then we're looking to do a prototype / demo of the complex citations, because we're conscious it's a much more kind of nascent state, it's much younger, and the level of kind of output in the time of the project is only short. These are only 6 to 12 months projects. It wouldn't be possible to do a full version of the piece. Next slide, please. So they took, just to say that I'm presenting the team's work here. I was part of the workshops, but this is actually the team I showed at the beginning. And they took the key concepts, the key requirements we had on the complex citations. And the first is we've got to get credit to authors and contributors to data and objects. By extension now, I'm curiously exploring engineers, new job. And then the next one is around that traceability. So those data that are cited within papers or white papers or position papers or policy, that needs to be traceable. So the analysis that underpins that work or that policy is reproducible and can be checked, especially when we talk about key things like IPCC. Third requirement is around, so we've had those initial discussions in that knowledge graph, and we're all conscious that it looks like it could be 5 or 6 levels big. How can we compress that and reduce that so we're down to 1 or 2 levels of the graph to make it easy to index, and to make that reliquary a nice, easy ingestible package by the indexing services, which means we can actually get a result much faster. And then the third one is around broad user base. So this work is actually funded by DCIP. It's a government department of science, industry and technology, innovation technology. And they've got a user base which is actually broader than academia. So it needs to bring commercial and industrial type requirements in too. So it's actually slightly broader than the original complex citations case. Next slide, please. Apologies for my voice. It's gonna make it to the end, I promise. So this is the original use case put together for BODC, and you can actually see you've got different levels. You go from sensor, to the data that's actually observed by the researcher, and they then submit a data set for a set of samples, be it a set of biological samples or a set of physics samples, and they get submitted to BODC. You get a DOI associated with them. Those data then get curated by BODC, and they actually get exploded out into many more granules. So collection T2Ds might be 100 granules in BODC from a ship. We then put that into a collection in BODC. So we've got what we call the series collection, which is all the traditional data. We've got samples collection. We've got water samples collections as well. And then effectively someone comes along and takes a bunch of different granules, and that can go into a DOI, which then can underpin that science. And that's the original kind of use case we started with. Next slide, please. And it's a big graph and not very ingestible by the indexers at all. So then a bit of a throwback to a previous project I worked on with Lou, where we looked at effectively a standard called SensorML, which was used to describe sensors and their outputs, and what processing happens to data when it comes from sensors. That's one of the original OGC standards from about 2002, I think. That enabled us to package up different types of metadata into an XML entity, and effectively there were components within there and connections. And she's taken this concept, which effectively has the instrument and the algorithm that's used to process those data that comes off the instrument, which then generates outputs, and applied that concept to the graph that we showed in the previous slides. Next slide, please. Hopefully I'm doing these slides justice, Lou.
I'm not sure. Should I click again?
Yeah, just keep it out to the next one, please.
Okay. All right.
There we go.
All right.
And then we get to this slide, which looks very much like one that Martina just showed. And you can see effectively on the top right-hand corner, we have that a single entity with all of its relationships. And they could be to data sets, they could be to funders, they could be to software, they could be to the sensors or fixed objects that observe those, and they could be to potentially the original DOI to those for those data. And this is effectively, this top right corner is just effectively a 1 or 2 level graph, which is nice and easy to ingest. And then that links off to another entity, which could go and affect your linked data service, which will give you that full graph for anyone who's curious about that and wants to navigate that and wants to understand that. So what they've done in this project is they've very neatly actually got all the information that would be needed by indexers for that credit piece, that reproducibility piece, in a nice flat graph, which can be readily ingested. But yet they're keeping the connection to that long complex graph, which might be used in future and can be inspected if people actually want to inspect that, but it won't be routinely indexed, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. And they've applied this to a couple of use cases. So Martina just showed the latest version of this. I know Lou and Martina have been working on applying this model to the IPCC use case. And this is what that would look like, the IPCC use case, and where you've actually got that readily ingestible bit on the top left, and then you've got that full graph at the bottom, which we're keeping for provenance and keeping for potential future technologies, but it doesn't need to be readily indexed. Next slide, please. And then they also applied this to an IQ expedition to see how this would work with expedition type data, thinking of the oceanographic use case. And you got a similar picture. And those entities in the top left can effectively include things like funders as well, which means you can start to identify what funders are connected to those. So it's a very broad piece, that single set connections in the top left, that can include anything where we believe there's attribution or credit would be needed. Next slide, please. Last slide. So there's some open questions which they're working on, they're thinking on at the moment. One is about the common labels and the relationships within the examples we've just shown. The others around actually have the common resource types. So we've actually got a model and that credit ontology, or there's one in the chat which Lou's looking at now. The ORE ontology, potentially looking at those just to actually see what common resource types can be used. And then also harmonizing those author and contributor properties. So it's still an open piece of work, but essentially what they've done in this is they've actually potentially addressed one of our major problems, which is the graphs are too big, they're not easy to ingest, and presented what could be a nice, much simpler model to actually produce a reliquary, which can be used by the indexers and potentially be demonstrated. Thank you. And thank you to all the people that did this work, because I'm conscious I did very little of this work, and they did pretty much they did all of it. I just contributed to a few sessions.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, so we have an opportunity. Let me check our time. 75. Well, let's take at least 10 minutes and we'll have a conversation. And then Leslie can wind us up. Let me stop sharing. Anybody want to have any questions that haven't yet been discussed in the chat with Joan or Martina or Justin? it's so interesting that this reliquary is actually putting a huge highlight on how we think about attribution and what needs to be considered. It's actually exciting and overwhelming at the same time. And it's causing us really consternation because we technically are ending the working group in just a few months. And it's like, okay, what did we get done? Well, I think we uncovered the reliquary and all of its tributaries and all of its parts. Okay.
Yeah, at least what I already figured out before, what we need is, and Martina already missed it, we need something like a repository for reliquaries. That has the correct metadata schema and is also understood by the by those citation counting. So at least there should be something like a schema how to express all those relationships in some common in some common repository that's easy to understand. Maybe somebody should make a start. So I will call it a synodo for reliquaries or collections or whatever.
Early on, we had we had folks on our team that had really strong relationships with Zenodo and felt that they might be able to be one of our initial creators of a reliquary. So it's I don't know if Martina and Graham were thinking about that at the time, but that that might be. John,
I suggested using Zenodo simply because it had a lot of the structure that we wanted already in place. We knew it wouldn't do everything, but in terms of kind of the limited resources and time that we had available, it gave us something where we could bring everything together. You know, the related works bit in particular was the nice bit where you can then link to other things and it would be understood. And it would give you something which would then have a PID itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have the sandbox, which means what you've shown is not actually live.
Yeah.
So that's a neat thing they do. Yeah.
And the other aspect is that if we do mint it, it has two DOIs. One which points to the particular instance, as we could do tomorrow. The other one is that another ID which points to the latest version. So if we can then evolve the object, you know, when we say, okay, this is how the JSON should be structured, for example, in a couple of months' time, then we could, you know, release another version, and the latest DOI would still point to that latest instance, which would hopefully will then become, you know, acts the transitory node and would be warped.
Yeah.
May I quickly add to that? So I think the updating will be important because if we implement that into our IPCC workflow, we won't have all the information from the start. So I think we will have to support versions of that.
I thought that Zenodo issues a separate DOI every time you create a version and then one collective DOI for everything, right?
The latest DOI goes to your latest version. So it's not for everything.
Yeah.
But you have one DOI for each version and then another one which then always points to the latest.
Let me the latest, not
let
for
me
the
pause us here.
Yeah,
let me pause us here and let's go over to Joan. She's got a
I just wanted to say that, like, I think one outcome could be like providing like guidance to repositories on how any repository could support a reliquary, you know, through related identifiers or what else would be needed. Because it seems like that is the most logical place for it to happen.
Yep.
How do we get the word out though? I mean, it's the first time I heard about it. So how do we reach out to entire repository community to adapt? Did it take a lot to adopt something, you know, this new, not quite established yet? You know, they normally adopt something that easy to adapt, you know, like a spoon fed in a way. So if it's still working, you know, they're not sure how to implement, it's gonna take a while for them to adopt, you know, into it. unless you kind of make it into data site metadata schema, then it's a lot easier to adopt, right? Something like that, but
it'll have to be part of a schema. So the short answer for that is most data repositories are members and use the DataCite DOI registry agency. So the schema would have to be supported by DataCite. It would be introduced through DataCite, and then with the guidance about the actual operations could come from this group, and we could be connected. But that's all surmising. That is not currently that piece is not yet in our remit for this round of the working group, but it's a really good question. Yes, I'll hold there, because I think Joan made the point that it's not just a Zenodo, that's just an example. It's all repositories.
I mean, you can start with the GRADE community. You know, Zenodo is a part of GRADE community, so it's a good place to start to get the word out, and maybe others will follow suit.
Yeah, well, it's really important to highlight the fact that the data that we're gathering should be in a discipline-specific repository. These are primary data sets that are being used, as opposed to aggregated data sets that would maybe land in a generalist repository. So GRADE is great. So that's the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative that NIH is funding. I had a hand in getting it started back in the day when there was a working group for the generalist repositories. But the data we're talking about really should be the primary data, the observation data that is in a discipline-specific repository. So that that is, we need to keep that in mind.
Right, but it's so broad though. Domain-specific repositories is so huge. I mean, do we start from V3 data that work? Where do we begin? Or NIH supported domain-specific repository? I mean, so this is a global organization, so we can't really talk about NIH only, but you know, where do we go to target domain-specific repositories?
So back to DataCite. So R3 data is owned by DataCite. DataCite has the entire list of repositories. They know the types. It's a community. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Justin.
I'll start with my last point from my first point to continue this conversation. And the key thing with this work is, as a group of data repositories, we need to be working with the indexers and DataCite and Crossref as a group of indexers and providers of PIDs. And we need to be working with the journals as a group of journals to reach a single set of recommendations that could be implemented across the community. One of the real challenges years ago when we were first kind of hypothesizing this work and looking at the problem was we were too small a voice to make a difference and make something happen. But the technology's evolved, the opportunities are there, and there's now a real impetus to do something about this. But this RDA group could end up growing to be 3, 4, 5 times the size of this in order to get that community that has the size needed to actually have that single set of recommendations, because what we're proposing here is a fundamental shift in the way that we cite data and the way attribution happens, and that should be a community-wide thing.
I do believe we are at the beginning of that. So foot stomping what Justin just said, we and bringing, I don't know if Matt Cannon is still on, but we've been, the publishing community and the repository community, discipline-specific repository community, have come together and in disjoint ways in order to figure out how best to cite data. Danny Kincaid is on. She's leading a working group for RDA that is not yet endorsed to connect the workflows between discipline-specific repositories and journals in order to get don't think reliquary, just think a single citation, a single dataset citation, making sure that if it's in a discipline-specific repository, that it's properly cited. Why is that hard? Because authors think that authors don't think about the data until they start to publish their work, and they don't leave enough time for the curation to take place, because discipline-specific repositories, in order to add the value that we need for reuse and fair data, need time for curation. So we need to disconnect that process for publishing data with the process for publishing papers. So exponentiate that. How, if data is its own research product and a contribution to the scientific record, specifically primary data, then we have to be able to enable attribution. And so we are like sitting on the problem with a reliquary, and as Justin's described. So yeah, and we have the right people. We have the right people to figure it out.
And I think that's the biggest win from the last 4 years, is we now have that quorum of people to actually make it happen.
Yep.
Now it's how do we make it happen, and what's that consensus, and what does that look like?
Yep. So we probably won't have a large promotion campaign until we are beyond the prototype, until we can actually stand up one thing, make it all the way through and figure out all the challenges. And then there'd be a promotion campaign for adoption. So we're not quite there yet.
Is there any general documentation I can share with the, anyone about this, reliquary?
I mean, yeah, we have the working group. So all of the content should be, although apologies, because I know RDA is still working to get it set up.
Is the interest group page? Is in the interest group page?
It is in the interest. Yes, it's a working group page. Leslie, this might be an opportunity. Are you still here with us, Leslie? Where are you? This might be an opportunity for me to hand this over to you to close this out. I'm looking. She was here.
Jeez.
Did we lose her? It is a terrible time in Australia for Leslie. Okay.
She was
so
there, but it might be a wrong button was pressed.
But she's still online.
Okay. So Sun Young actually gives a really good point. If one of my co-chairs could please navigate to the link to our working group, that would be brilliant, to make sure everybody has an opportunity to join. You can see that there are different stakeholder groups associated with solving this issue. Please do join, even if you just want to keep up to date. Please make sure that your community, and you're welcome to share it, as Sun Young has indicated. How do we get other people involved? Just have them hop on. We'll be sure to do a summary post following this RDA, give an indication as to where we are with all of the elements and how we're going to conclude this particular working group recommendation, and the very high probability, although we haven't had a formal conversation within the working group co-chairs, but we're going to have to continue the work.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then and then taking that forward.
Right. By the way, Tiger has the facilitator program. So if you get one of those, they can actually help you generate the checklist and white paper and all this stuff. If you're forming another working group, definitely get that assistance from RDA, and that will help you.
Way to promote the Tigers. Yes, I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Martina. Wonderful, everyone. It's been really great having you. I'm glad you were here. And enjoy the rest of your RDA.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.